Hello, I'm Charles from HDR Photography. A few days ago, I went for a walk up to Mount Glorious and I walked along the Greensfall track photographing some fungi and some moss with my Takina 100mm macro lens, and also some very eye-catching images using my Takina 11-20mm ultra-wide lens. Now if you want to see the whole photo walk, here's the video here, and it runs for about 30 minutes and goes into everything that I did on that morning. But on that morning I found that the light was just so scattered and it was very hard to actually get a very nice image like the one you see behind me here. And this is where I had to use high dynamic range photography, often referred to HDR photography. Now you'll see in this video I will cut in and out between how I actually took the photo. Also, we're going to be editing a few sets of these images in Adobe Lightroom Classic and merging them in a HDR composite image using Photomatix Pro. Now I know that Lightroom Classic has a HDR function built into it, has its own plugin. I prefer to use the program that I have used for many years now, which is Photomatix Pro. And I will show you how I edit sets of images in Adobe Lightroom, then exporting them through the plugin of Photomatix, merging the composite image, and then bring it back into Lightroom to finish editing this image. Now during this video what we'll do is I'll actually show you how I took the photos on the day, and then we'll cut back in. I'll show you how I edit the photo, and then we'll cut back to the next photo of how I shot the next images. Let's start the video off with the first image here that you can see behind me. So as you can see, I'm very close to this huge tree trunk. I can't get really any further, because if I get any further I'm going to get the walking track here, and I really don't want that. What I'm trying to do here is actually to get a nature scene, but I don't want to really see this footpath here, this walking track. So I've actually set up here. If I wanted to try to get the whole lot in, I would actually move my tripod a little bit further back. But in doing this, what I end up getting is this path here, all these wooden planks here in the way. And for this shot, what I want is just a nature scene, just like if I was in the middle of the forest. We're at 11mm, we'll go for f8, and this will actually give us enough depth of field, and at f8 we'll actually see what it looks like. So I'm shooting on manual mode. We come up here to f8. If I take it off live view and I check my LCD screen here, it's telling it 1/15. I'm a bit underexposed. Okay, 1/13. So camera settings, f8, 11mm, ISO 100. And for white balance, you can actually use auto white balance if you want. But if you are shooting in JPEG for a scene like this, then I would definitely recommend that you use one of your presets, because you can adjust your shot in Lightroom a little bit when you get home if it's a bit too bright or a bit too dark. But the one thing that's very hard to control is your white balance. So I know a lot of people like shooting in auto white balance, but if you're one of these people that is shooting in JPEG a scene like this, then definitely use a preset. Use Sunny or Fluoro. I wouldn't be using anything warmer than Sunny, because it's just going to warm your image up too much. I like shooting in manual white balance, and because I'm shooting in RAW, when I go home I can actually adjust my white balance, because in auto white balance this could actually make the scene quite warm, but in manual white balance I can actually dial it in to exactly what I'd like. I like shooting what I see is what I get, so manual white balance. And I'm around 5,200 kelvins. Also, I'm actually using a timer remote. It's on the tripod, there's no hurry. I could actually be shooting, if I didn't have a timer remote, just with a 2-second delay. So I'm not touching the camera, so I'm avoiding any sort of camera shake. At 1/13 of a second, I could have a bit of camera shake if I didn't have the timer remote. We'll just take one photo, that's it. On the LCD screen here, it actually looks quite good. If I actually show up my highlights, my RGB highlights, the highlights here are blown. But if it go darker than this, then I'm really going to have a very dark foreground. So let's see how low of a exposure we need to go to actually get rid of our highlights. So we're at 1/13th of a second. We'll come up to 1/25th of a second. That's it. I still have highlights blown at 1/25th. And can you see the image here? The foreground is just so dark. Let's see how much I need to go. So now I'm at 1/60th, still at f8. That's it. The highlights are just about not blown anymore. I've actually got blue sky. But look at the image. I can't see any detail in front of me here. This is where an image like this, we actually come very early in the morning, or we come very late in the afternoon when the light is more subtle. Normally at 10 o'clock, I'm not out here. But also I show you this because sometimes we just can't get out in the best part of the day, which is very early in the morning, late in the afternoon. We can't get out at those times. We could be stuck at trying to photograph something like this at lunchtime. You're out with your family, you see this and you're like, yeah, I'd still like to take a photo of it, you know. I'll never be back here again. We have to learn how to actually photograph a scene like this when the light is not at its best. And the way to do it is bracketing a set of images. Often record to HDR photography. Now most of the time when I mention HDR photography to people, they cringe, they go like, oh, dislike this so much because it looks ghastly. But that's because people do not understand high dynamic range photography. They just over process their images. They end up with halos around their subjects and all that. If you're photographing a scene like this or a tree, you'll have a big halo around the tree. That's because you've pushed your editing too far. All we're trying to do is blend our shadows with our highlights to end up with a scene that our eye is seeing. And this is what I'll actually show you now. What we do is we actually come back middle of the road. So our first image, if we actually come back and we look at the settings of our first image, it was 1/13th, a little bit too bright. What we're going to do is we're actually going to set our image to 1/125th of a second, f8, and we'll take a photo. That's it. Now, we're in middle of the road here. Our highlights are blown, but our shadows are not too bad. So what we're going to do here, on the Nikons, what happens is, I've got a little button here on the left called bracketing. So holding the info button down, I hold the bracket here. I have on my screen at the back. On the right it says 0.7 and on the left it says OF because it's off at the moment. If I turn the back dial here once, it'll say 3. If I turn it to the left, it'll say -2 or +2. Now if it's at -2, it means it will take 2 darker frames. If it is on +2, it will take 2 frames over your correct exposure. But I go to the right. So it'll say 3, 5, 7, 9. Because there is so much difference between our highlights and our shadows here, I'll actually choose 5. The 0.7 means this is your EF, your exposure. So every frame will have 0.7 of a stop in difference. I rarely go above 1. So we'll stick at 0.7. I could go to 2 exposure levels. So every stop increasing the light amount by 2. But when you come to merging these, this is where you can have problems because the gap between the images is so great. So normally I like choosing 0.7 or 1. I don't care between 5 and 7 images. If I have to go to 7 or to 9 with a 0.7 of a stop, I'll use it. If there's a lot of wind, then I might actually go to 1, but I rarely go above 1. So we'll try 0.7. Okay, so we're in single shutter. We're going to choose 5 frames. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now our exposure ranges from 1/60th, comes down to 1/40th, comes down to 1/25th, comes down to 1/15th, and comes down to 1/10th. This actually looks really good, and we've actually got a very nice detail in this foreground. And compared to all this, I'll actually take all the bracketing off and we'll just take one exposure at 1/25th And look how dark the image is. Can you see it here? Now these are unedited. And this is what it would look like if it was edited. So here are our 7 images. They're already in Adobe Lightroom. Now we go to the Develop module. What I do is I actually grab the middle image. We have 7 images in the series. I highlight the middle image and I come up here and I click on my profile for the Takina 11-20mm f2.8 lens with the landscape profile. Now my color profile is Adobe Landscape. What I do first is I adjust the white balance. Now this is very easily done by either going up to Has Shot and clicking Auto, and if you're happy with the color rendition of the image, you can leave it at that. Or you can click on the eyedropper tool here and select a part of the image that is neutral grey. It has to be neutral grey. It doesn't matter if it's dark, but it has to be neutral grey. So I'll come up here to the tree stump here because I know on the day this part here looked very neutral grey. So I'll click on it. So now it's showing me my white balance is 3900 kelvins with a slight magenta tint. Now this actually looks quite good. So now we start editing, and the secret to editing a HDR image is not to over process the image before we merge it into a HDR image, especially when we come down to using dehaze, texture and clarity, because these 3 sliders here can cause us a lot of grief once we merge them by giving us halos. We'll start off like we normally edit an image. We'll come up to the blacks. We hold the Alt key down. Now I'm using a Windows PC and I try to remove all the shadows. The whites, we come down, we can see that the whites are blown out a little bit. We come up to the highlights, we do the same thing, and we'll just increase the shadows just slightly. Now the clarity is already set at 14, we'll leave it at that. The dehaze, if I hold the Alt key down and slide to the right, I can just see now some color coming into the screen here, so I'll stop it here. And the texture, I'll just add just that fraction of texture. I'll leave the vibrance and the saturation alone. Now I come back down to the thumbnail image down here, right click on it, click Develop Settings, click Copy Settings, and I click on everything that I've adjusted. And you've noticed that I haven't cropped the image. I want the image as wide as possible. So we click Copy. Now we highlight all images. It doesn't matter if you highlight the image that you've already edited because the settings will just be recopied over the top. And we just click Paste. Now if I go back to the Library module, you'll actually see now all our settings have been applied. Now normally when I'm using an ultra-wide lens, I will actually try to fix the distortion. But like you saw in the video, the idea here is to actually get a very nice eye-catching photo. So I don't want to fix the distortion in any part of this image. I like the distortion that is displayed. So let's now merge this set of images into a HDR image. Now I highlight my 7 images, right click on them, and I come all the way down here to Export in Photomatix Pro. Now here it actually gives me a setting. Do I want to align the images, crop the align results? Both of these are ticked, and it gives you the option here of were the photos taken on a tripod or were they handheld? Now this is quite important because if they were handheld, Photomatix will actually try to correct a bit of camera movement between your images. If you state that they were taken on a tripod, Photomatix will not really look at aligning the images too much. It will take it that all the images are aligned properly. So these were taken on a tripod, it's highlighted there. Now if you've got people walking through the image or there's trees moving and all that, you can say show options to remove ghost. So if you've got a tree that's swaying a little bit, the branches are swaying, then you can actually go through and remove the ghosts of the images, and what it will do is actually stop the tree from moving. Now there's no ghosting, so we'll leave that alone. We do not reduce noise, and we just say reduce chromatic aberration. And we click on here, combine file images. And the output is an 8-bit TIFF. And we say stacked with selected photos, and they will all come back into Adobe Lightroom once they're edited. So we click export. Now it is exporting these 7 images as TIFF files to Photomatix Pro. Now these are temporary TIFF files because once you've actually re-imported the file into Lightroom, these 7 temporary TIFF files are actually deleted. So there's no need to go looking for them on your hard drive, they are gone. So Photomatix Pro opens, it's loading the 7 images. You can see up here, it's aligning the images. Now it is merging them into a HDR composite image. Now it is reducing the chromatic aberrations in the images. So this is what Photomatix has given us. Now this image looks like this because when I processed the images for my photo walk, I actually edited this image in Photomatix already. So it's remembered the settings up here, but we will actually start from scratch. If we look here on the right, Photomatix actually gives us quite a few presets on how we'd like the image blended as a HDR. We can choose default, balanced. Now balanced means it's actually looking at the image between the highlights and the shadows and trying to give you a correctly exposed. We can choose photographic. Now here you can see the highlights are a bit more blown, but we've actually got a little bit more detailed in the foreground. We can choose natural, painterly, painterly 2, painterly 3, painterly 4, and so on. You can really go crazy editing these images, but I like to keep things very natural. Let's choose photographic. Now this looks pretty good. If we choose photographic and we look on the left here, it gives you quite a few different types of sliders. If, for example, we use the default, our sliders here vary quite a lot because on the default, it actually gives you many more options of how to actually blend your images into a HDR image. And this is the one that when you're learning, I tell people, start off with the presets, but if you're not happy with the presets, then go to default and then just use the sliders to see how the program works. Now for me, I use HDR just to blend my images, so I really don't want the image to be grunged up. All I'm trying to do is to get an even amount of highlights and shadows into the image. So the strength here of the processing, I keep it between 40 and 50%. The more strength you apply, the more chances you are of getting halos, ghosting around your image. Like you could end up with ghosting around the tree branches here. So we'll come back down to 40%. Color saturation, I normally just leave it at 50%. I don't want the image oversaturated. Now we have tone compression and detail contrast. And these, the more you slide up, the more compression you actually give. And also, the more contrast you give to the image. The image ends up having a lot more detail. I rarely go all the way here. I normally stick at around 4. This is starting to look very good. Now we have light adjustments. If you think of light adjustment as you're shining a torch on your image and the angle that it's coming from will be highlighted. So if it's in the middle here, you're basically shining a torch straight onto the image. So the light will be very even. If we move it all the way to the right, it is way up here. If we move it all the way to the left, it is way down there. Because it is very bright up here, there is no way that I actually want my light to be up here because this makes this area darker. If I'm shining it head on, it's actually giving me a very even light. But if I come down to the bottom here, can you notice that here now, I've actually got a lot more light, but my light up here hasn't changed too much from being in the middle. So this is the lighting adjustment that we will choose. Just under here, see in the lighting effects, you've actually got 5 different ways to choose lighting when you're learning. So you can pick natural light, you pick natural plus, then you have medium, surreal, and surreal plus. I actually don't like using these. I prefer to actually control the light by myself, but that doesn't mean that you can't have a play, and if you like one of these when you're editing, then choose it. Now we have smooth highlights here. Now the more you smooth the highlights, the more you blend your highlights here. Because we've got quite a bit of problem with the highlights, we'll actually come up to about 70. Now the white point is the amount of brightness in the image. Now if we go all the way up, we can see like, wow, we've really overdone it. We can come back here, 25%. This looks very good. The same with the black point. The more you slide the black point to the right, the more your shadows will get darkened. So I don't want my shadows darkened, so I'll keep my black point pretty much to the left. Gamma is self-explanatory. Basically, gamma is your exposure. So the more you slide to the right, the brighter your image will be. So we just touch it up. Okay, that's it. And we can see on our histogram here, this looks very good. I don't want to clip the image too much up the top here. Now for the temperature, it's sitting on 0 at the moment. If we slide it to the left, we're going to cool the image down. We can see now it's quite bluey. And if we go to the right, we're just warming the image up. We'll just set it over halfway. That's it. Now, if we like this sort of preset, and because we're going to be doing other images the same style, we can actually save this preset for ourselves. So down here in preset on the left, we click unlisted, and then we go save preset. And you can see here that I've actually already got a few presets made up. So this one, I could actually call it HDR tree number 1 and say save. So the next image, I could actually just click on that preset and all this work will be done for me. We're happy with our image, we just click save and re-import. Now it is actually blending these images together and it will have re-imported them into Adobe Lightroom. So there's our image. It actually looks very good, but I just want to punch up the detail a little bit here in the tree. So we come up to the develop settings. Now we can just add a bit more clarity to the image, a bit of texture, and now we can add just that little bit of dehaze. That's it. That actually looks very nice. You can see that this is so easy to do when you know how to do it. This doesn't look ghastly at all. This is the beauty of HDR, that you can actually grab a set of images from your camera and blend them into a HDR or high dynamic range image to come out with something that really your eye is seeing in the forest. This is what I saw. So this is why I actually like photographing in high dynamic range when it is needed. So now let's go on to the second image and we'll see how I actually shot the second images taken of this tree but in portrait orientation. Let's try a frame a little bit differently. How about we actually go a little bit closer and just try to get the tree trunk, hey? We have to remember to reset our focus. Now I use back button focusing on here. This will be my next video on for back button focusing. That's it. So I'm in focus. The good thing with back button focus is that I can keep touching this shutter button here and it's not going to upset my focus. So I could actually recompose, do whatever I want. My focus hasn't moved at all. We'll go f5.6 and at the moment on 1/25th of a second, it's showing a fairly dark foreground, but the background here isn't too blown out. So we'll just take one photo. Let's see what it looks like. Not really the feel that I was actually hoping for. It's a bit like ordinary. Let's see what happens if we tilt it on its edge, eh? We'll shoot in portrait orientation. Lock everything down properly. We're at 11 mils. Now, let's take one portrait orientation. Now that looks great. Don't you think so? Look at that. And this is what's great about the tripod. Remember before I was saying, like, you know, there's no way I could actually be shooting at 1/25th of a second. For me, I get the shakes a bit. With the tripod, I can actually just move it around exactly how I like. Just terrific. So we already know when the camera was here, when we put it in a bracketed set, that 7 images we needed at 0.7. But here, I'll only shoot 5 images, but what I will do is I'll set it to an EV of 1. So it'll jump by 1 on every stop. So we come up here, 1 stop, and we go 5. We move to continuous slow. That's it, and let's go. 5. So 5 exposures, an EV of 1 stop per frame. So we've got 1/100th, 1/50th, 1/25th, 1/13th, 1/6th. Now, remember in our last frame, when we shot the tree over here, we had 7 frames with an EV difference of 0.7. And our darkest image was 1/100th, and our lightest image was 1/6. So now, because we've shot just 0.3 extra, we've increased our EV value. We're only using 5 frames to get exactly what we had last time. If I decide to go to 3 frames, I would actually have to shoot to 2 stops per photo. And for something like this, I would be bound to get ghosting because the light value changes so much between frames. 5, they'll blend in quite nicely. There was actually no wind here. This will actually look very nice. So these are our 5 images that we took, and they had a 1 EV variation between photos. Now, instead of really starting from scratch again, this is the beauty of Lightroom. Because we've already taken one set of images and the light is very similar, then all I have to do is grab one of these images here, highlight it, and I come up here into Develop Settings and I click Copy. I click Copy the settings. Now I come up to my second set here, highlight all the images, right click on it and say Paste. And that's it. The editing is very close. Now all I have to do is go through the images and just see what the editing looks like, and if I feel that it is too bright or too dark. Now understand that your brightest image has to be quite bright because we want to see all that shadow details, and your darkest image does have to be quite dark, especially in a situation like this, so that your highlights are not blown when you actually come to blend them as a HDR image. So this actually looks very good. So I grab my 5 images down here. This time I use the thumbnails. It does the same thing. Highlight them, come up to Export, click Photomatix Pro, and I'll just click the same thing again because they were taken on a tripod as well. I click Export and away it goes again. It will export these 5 images as TIFF files into Photomatix Pro. There we go. There's our image. Now look at that. That just looks so nice. But not everybody just likes natural. So if we wanted to grunge it up, we can easily come up here and we can choose a very grunged image. We can click on Interior. We can click on Deep. Let's click on Interior 2 or Interior 1. Actually, we'll click on Interior 2 and we'll grunge it up a little bit. So we'll push the shadows a bit more. Now, we can add some contrast. We can increase the highlights or decrease them. Now we'll leave them decreased. Although the image is a bit dark, that actually looks quite different to our last one, and we can actually brighten up a bit in Adobe Lightroom. So we'll accept this and we'll click Save and Re-import, and this will show you 2 different images of the same tree and how you can actually vary your HDR processing to actually suit your need. Now the one thing that I tell people, whether they're taking photos or editing photos, is that photography is so good for this because everybody has a different way of taking a photo and editing the photo. And that's the beauty of photography. I've been teaching people how to take photos and also how to edit their images on Adobe Lightroom. And this is the one thing that I really try to explain to them is find your style, find your style in taking a photo, and also find your style in editing your images. So this is our image here in Lightroom. Now we can just lighten it up a little bit, increase the exposure. We can increase the shadows a bit more. Now the orange here is actually, for me, a bit too saturated. But if we look into the context of the image, now remember we're grunging this image up, so we're not looking at something natural. If we're taking this in context, the greens are very saturated, the oranges are very saturated. Look at the tree, it is very gnarly, it looks really sort of grunged, and that's what we're trying to create. So we go down that road and we emphasize this as much as we can without cooking the image. Now I am very happy with this. I'll come back to library. I'll highlight the two sets of images. The reason I'm doing this is now I will actually show you the two ways of editing. So on our right here is the one that we've just done, a bit of a grunge HDR. On our left here is our plain HDR image. And can you see how they are so different? The one on the left looks very natural, but the one on the right looks very unnatural, but both of them would have an appeal to different types of people. And this is why I say to people, this is what this program is so good, because it can render you a very natural looking HDR image, which is what I like, but it also can give you an unrealistic image that can also be just as captivating. I will quickly show you another set of images that I didn't videotape, and that is of a park bench that we actually photographed in HDR, because by that time it was around 11:30 in the morning and the light was very harsh, so getting just a single frame again was very difficult. Now we'll quickly edit a last set of images, which is this one here, and there were 7 images in this sequence. So we'll click on this center image. This is of the park bench. We'll click on the Tachyna profile. Ultra-wide angle lenses have a habit that the center of the image actually looks further away than what it is. So most of their profiles correct this, and it brings the center of the image in line with the rest of the image. So there's no distortion in the center. Now, can you see here we have 7 frames. This is the darkest image. This is the brightest image. In the brightest image, look at that. We see all this detail here. And in the darker image, we can actually see the detail in these trees over here, and the path is actually not blown out. So we come back to the center image. We will correct the color cast. We'll just look down here on the bottom. Now that's a bit too green. Let's see what auto gives us. Look at that. That actually looks quite good. Now there's a bit too much magenta up here for me, so I'll just reduce the magenta down to 21, but I'll leave the color temperature alone. Now we'll quickly edit the blacks, control the whites a little bit. Now you notice that I actually don't take the whites all the way down, because the whites and the highlights do similar. I'll actually take it halfway. That's it. Now for this one I will actually correct just the horizontals. The camera was just that fraction unsquare. That's it. That looks great. Click OK. Now right click on it, click develop settings, click copy. But now because I have changed the aspect ratio and I've straightened the angle, I will click on here for crop. I'll click OK. I didn't use a radial filter, so I can uncheck that. There. Click copy. Grab my 7 images, highlight, develop, paste. Perfect. There you go. All the images are copied across. Now I click my 7 images, right click on the thumbnail, click export, click Photomatix Pro, and away I go again. We'll go into Photomatix. Now this time I really don't want this grunge, so I'll come back here and I'll click tree number 1. Now this looks much cleaner, but we can see there's actually quite a bit of a greenish tinge here. If we reduce the temperature, this looks a bit better. Now the color tinge here can actually be quite easily corrected in Lightroom when we go back into it. Now the color temp here is a little bit green. Now on the day it actually looked very similar to this. Sometimes this bench here actually has moss growing on it, and it does look this green. We could have actually fixed this in Lightroom before exporting, but it is just as easy to actually adjust it when we come back into Lightroom. So I'll actually add just a little bit of more strength in the HDR here. Now that actually looks very good like this. So we'll leave it like that. Now I'm happy with this, but let's see what the photography preset would look like. Look at that. Now this is just a preset. It is a one-click thing. Now it actually gives you a very nice blended image. Something that you would find very hard to edit has a single image in Lightroom. So we'll accept this. we'll go back, save it, and we'll bring it into Lightroom. There we go. So there's our image here. Looks very nice. We go into the develop module now, and all we can do is we'll just raise our shadows up a little bit. Now, if I come up here to the hue saturation slider, I'll grab the saturation, click on the little toggle here. Now I can actually just reduce the amount of green here. I'll grab the tree, and you can see if I slide up, I'm increasing the yellow. Slide down, I'm actually making it a bit more neutral. Now we have to touch the luminous at the same time. That looks really good. Click done. We'll come up here back to basic, and we'll just add just that little bit of clarity to sharpen the image up, a bit of texture. There you go. I am really happy with that. Look at that. So this is our first HDR image. This is our second one. Look at that. It's just so different. This is our third image, and they all have a slightly different flavor. Now, for comparison purposes, I will show you the HDR image again with also the non-HDR image. So when we used 5 images to blend into a HDR composite image, I actually used the middle one, which was image number 3. And if I use 7 images to blend a HDR image, I grabbed the 4th image in the set. So here is the first image edited in HDR. This is the same image without HDR being applied. Here is the second image in HDR. Now just as a single image. And now this is the last image of the park bench in HDR. And now just as a single image. So as you can see, using Adobe Lightroom Classic and Photomatix Pro, you can end up with a very natural looking HDR image or something that is surreal. And the amount of surreal that you want to add to the image is up to you. You can really sort of turn the volume up on the image and make it, you know, like super grunge, or you can just go halfway like we did in some of these images here. There is no right or wrong. You just have to learn how to control the image. Now, for example, if you weren't in like a forest situation like we were today, and you were outside photographing a landscape image or photographing an old house, and you wanted to get the shadows and then the sky and all that, then if you're after a natural image, you would have to be very careful how you process your image in Photomatix, because you'd end up with halos around your image. This is if you're after a natural image. If you're wanting to have a surreal image, then you would be accepting that halo around the image. Thank you for watching. I hope this has helped you understand how to photograph and edit HDR images, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.